What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 19th episode of Super Brain Radio. We're on the last volume of Chapter 4, Grow, which is all about tangibly making change, whether it's biologically, mentally, spiritually, phenomenologically. Any type of change is going to encompass the stuff we've talked about in this chapter so far. And this last episode here, The Art of Transfer, is probably my favorite one in the chapter for sure. And that's because not only does it encompass the previous episodes to a large degree, I think it delivers a lot of perspective on what it means to get better at something. Now, first and foremost, we're not actually going to go through like the laws of transfer and what that means to everything specifically. What I want to deliver here is perspective and awareness, and also some analogies that I think will help. As you see the first, kind of sentence or the words largest in bold, I guess I have zero communication skills when it comes to the actual major, and I have no idea what that's called because I don't think it's the title, but it says use glasses to climb ladders. Duh. And what that means is, if you're climbing the ladder of success, you can imagine the rungs at the bottom being the largest in width, in density, and overall structure of the rung itself. It's easiest to climb from the lowest level in whatever it may be, a company, sports performance skills, biological enzyme accumulation. It's the easiest to start developing in the first place because, in theory, you're making an infinite percent increase. You're going from 0 to 1. You literally knew absolutely nothing about something, you got exposed, and you learned something. On your end, that's technically an infinite yield. You did an unbelievable job at exposing yourself to something and remembering. That's the very, very first rung. And as you climb higher and higher, imagine that the little rungs get ever more so narrow, a little bit more fragile, and maybe even a little bit slippery. And what that analogy is meant to describe is that as you progress and move towards excellence or mastery in anything, the difficulty it takes to get better increases. And when we ask ourselves why is that, the law and art of transfer is very much the first thing that comes to mind, as well as the fact that when we break it down into like the portions of the law I'm going to describe and the terminology I'm going to use, you'll see how they kind of create a Venn diagram or a web of things you need to pay attention to. Almost like you're a secret agent going through all the lasers and sneaking your way to the diamonds at the end of the room. Getting to the room is probably the easy part until you realize that there's lasers on and you have to climb through them. So what we're really talking about now is that level of specificity for whatever it is you want to get better at is going to increase as you move upwards. And as you move upwards, what also is going to be a confounding factor to be aware of is the hours, the amount of stress needed to create change, and all of those things. So it's not just an increase in specificity, but it's an increase in overall involvement. And now we have to start to realize if you're going to be more involved with something, let's say you're moving from casual dating to living with your significant other, there's going to be a lot more things that could potentially go wrong because there's more variables involved. So as you guys may have heard once or twice, I'm new to golf. So at first, it's just hit the ball. If I can hit the ball nicely every single time, it's a one-step equation, and I'm either going to get a green thumbs up or a red thumbs down, and that's the end of it. But as you get better at golf, it starts to be the concept that it's not just hitting the ball in general. You want to hit it right. You want to hit it in the correct area. You want to make a proper decision with what clubs you're going to use. You want to inference the wind, the ground, and all this stuff. So as the variables in the equation expand, that likelihood for failure is going to move up as well. And that's why we talked about success to failure ratios, rates of recovery, what it means to have an excellence capacity prior to this episode, because this is when it's going to integrate. So it's funny, Ghost Superbrain is my second company. It's more meant to deal with the public. My private company, the Performance Vibe, is 100% focused on making those 1 to 3% improvements with the people who are the most elite in their field. And not only is this separated for obviously financial reasons, for confidentiality and protection reasons, for marketing reasons, but most importantly for me, it's separated for brain reasons. It is so different to go from functioning with a small cohort on making a 1 to 3% improvement to just giving consultation based advice to someone who's a novice in being exposed to maybe cognitive performance in the first place. So we need to recognize that the elite working for 1 to 3% improvement are actually going to need far more of everything you could think of. Not just stress-related damage, but substrate or nutrition or energy that you need to recover from it, and everywhere in between. So instead of reading from a book and talking about the laws of transfer and all these specific neurological things, we're going to break it down to 3 key points that describe the laws and art of transfer very, specifically in my mind, from looking at not just the science, but what's actually happening in real life when we make improvements for people, whether they're the elite 1 to 3% or a novice just gaining exposure. Novelty is the first one, and all 3 of these can be seen in the world of science, can be seen in the world of communications and phenomenology and perception, as well as the world of actual tangible training. So novelty is important because, as we've talked about in the past, I believe this was the intensification episode, what gets things red hot neurologically for the neurons in your brain are peptides, blood flow, and electricity. So if we want to increase those things to continue or spark a learning process, we need this novelty to be the perfect balance of similar and dissimilar. And although that may sound contraindicating in the sentence format, let's go back to my golf reference. My first lesson officially was on Friday of this past week. So, for me to even have a communication platform with the person teaching me, we need to find some common ground, because my world of similar is incredibly small for golf. My world of dissimilar is expansive. Thus, novelty is very easy. But let's say we zoomed 2 years down the line. That similar and dissimilar balance is going to change. And if we zoom to working with the best golfers on the planet, that similar dissimilar is now favoring the similar and not favoring the dissimilar, making novelty more difficult. Ultimately, my point is, novelty is a threshold phenomenon, not simply, let's just do something random and kind of stupid, and that's going to spark the learning process. No, that is not the point at all. The art of transfer has this notion of precision, right? Specificity, however you want to look at it. Meaning, it's improving upon something that's already been learned. So that similar dissimilar paradox is going to be specific to the person, the skill, and where they are in the skill acquisition process. So if it's something brand new that you're working on, you got to view that similar dissimilar ratio appropriately. Next, we'll talk about the actual notion of precision, and this is mainly going to be biological, neurological, within the body. And what we're really talking about here, and it can also apply to physics, mind you, what we're really talking about here is, are the specific things that the motor cortex is going to use being activated in the practice, and do they appropriately, and almost appropriately, it's not even the right word, it needs to be almost exactly match what you're looking to get better at. So, for example, let's say we're looking at something like a squat. We want to pick the squat that not only mimics, the biological angles. In fact, I would say the anatomical angles of a squat in your ability to get better at a sports performance skill are actually kind of at the bottom of the hierarchy. What we do want to mimic, though, is where the center of gravity is, where the inertia and acceleration changes are, and what the total amount of force produced is. Now, if you take a brief second to what I said prior, it's biological, it's neurological, and lastly, it's physics. That makes sense. We need to make sure we're recycling energy in the same exact way. We need to make sure that we're under the same exact electrical and ionic conditions. And then lastly, we can worry about the anatomy and the actual vectors and angles. But think about it this way. If you're practicing something that you're already excellent at, then you actually don't need to probably worry about the vectors and angles so much, because you're absolutely already good at them at this point of being elite in something. And what needs to be focused on are the other two. But that's just most likely. You can totally be the other way around. But ultimately, we need to look at precision as being a summation of biological, of physical, as in physics, not as in the body, and neurological, electrical, blood-based components for what we want to get better at, and that's how we describe the transfer and precision of what you're doing. So you would probably look at the precision law as the why that you're doing the training that you're doing, whereas novelty will be the what. And lastly, that brings us to versatility. And this is going to be the trickiest, and it is totally stepping its toes in the water of novelty and precision. But that's the point. That's why coaching is a profession, and that's what makes it different from wearing a lab coat and being a researcher. The skill that you're using and attempting to improve, especially at the top 1/3 or even the top 1/6 of being elite, is going to involve the skill having enough real estate in your motor cortex. Now, this means that it's got enough neurological recruitment that it can do something either really precise, really badass for a long time, and more importantly, recover quickly from it. And that can only happen if the skill has been chronically reaffirmed in more than one environment. Meaning, as I'm learning about golf, they tell me that the swing itself should actually be pretty similar amidst all the golf clubs, and what changes is the earth around you, the ball placement, and the club. And if you want to change angles, you move things, you don't change so much what you're swinging. And that is the perfect way to tell us that it needs to be successful in more than one place. I can't only swing a certain way for short distance and mid distance, and especially even shorter distances. What I need to do is be able to have success with multiple different things in my hand in multiple different positions in the earth, whether it's sand or rough grass or the fairway, and all of those things. We also need to ensure that the skill is going to be able to recover, going back to that recovery episode, in each of those domains. Because success is not just people clapping for you, it's if it was also efficient enough. And if it was not energetically efficient enough, then it's going to be more difficult to recruit and need greater either demand or novelty or excitation to be there. And that's why it needs to be successful in multiple environments, and it needs to be reaffirmed in those environments. So the difference between success and reaffirmation has to do with the difference between the brain and the mind. We need success biologically, and then the phenomenological person needs to accept that that was successful and allow themselves to have a positive response to it.